The high interest rates, high inflation and salary increases that are below inflation have led to consumers having to dig deep into their pockets. Compounding the problem was the festive season spending that added even more pressure on consumers, as well as expenditure for school fees and school uniform. Some consumers are now undertaking debt review as they are unable to meet their monthly debt obligations.
We've seen a significant increase in this January compared to last January. It's about 41% higher in terms of the inquiries that we're receiving. And I think that's driven by a few things. One is that last year was a very difficult, probably the most difficult financial year for South Africans, at least in the last 15, 20 years. And inflation, particularly inflation on food, electricity and petrol. On top of that, the interest rate increases. And on top of that, the fact that the load shedding really impacted a lot of small businesses and there hasn't been any growth in terms of jobs and people's salaries. All of those things really impacted a lot of consumers. And we've certainly seen a significant increase in January. And I think we expect to see the same for the rest of 2024.
Debt review can help protect consumers against creditors. Debt counselors can also assist to negotiate a favorable interest rate for you. But you are not allowed to take on more debt when you are under debt review.
I think in debt review, you basically extending how long you have to repay back the debt that you owe. The main advantage is that instead of having, let's say, 2 years to repay a loan, you're going to get 4 or 5 years, depending on your personal situation, depending on how much you can afford to pay on a monthly basis. But by virtue of that, you're also signaling to the entities you borrow money from, whether they're banks or other lenders, that you're serious about repaying back your debt, but you will not be able to pay on the original terms. So you're actually asking for relief. So you're doing the responsible thing. And you often, what happens is, because lenders are keen to get their money back, they'll also negotiate in terms of potentially reducing interest rates as well.
Debt Review says it's done research which showed that many consumers had set themselves budgets for the festive season and planned for their purchases. But unfortunately, some of these plans were not necessarily executed.
Many people are sitting with the arrears of struggling already before the festive season started, and a lot of times they were hoping that maybe there's a bonus that could maybe alleviate the pressure. For many people, there weren't, and possibly there's obviously your festive season spending, which has added even more pressure onto their budgets, and inevitably it leads to the beginning of the year where consumers are really facing a very tough time.
Consumers are asked to differentiate between needs and wants and not to overcommit themselves by buying things they cannot afford. They should also be mindful of the high interest rate environment.
When we are about to buy items, especially if it's, for example, not your regular items like your groceries and electricity, etc., that we really differentiate firstly between wants and needs. Need meaning I can't live without this, want meaning this makes my life more comfortable. And then looking at what that item is truly going to cost you. If you're going to finance it, what is the impact of interest? How does it possibly, we can't say that there can't be more interest rate hikes. We're hoping there won't be. But if the interest rate does increase again, can you still afford it? If the cost of living keeps increasing at between 5 and 6% per month, can your budget, does it still have room to breathe and maneuver?
Recent research done by the banking sector has shown that about 60% of consumers run out of cash only 5 days after receiving their paycheck. Many of these consumers then resort to credit in order to put food on the table. But the downside is that you are likely to pay a high interest rate on unsecured debt. Naledi Matlapeng, SABC News, Johannesburg.